Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep on a topic that's pretty close to your portfolio, Singapore's coral reefs.
Okay.
But we're going to be looking at them not just for their beauty, but like a financial institution would, weighing the risks and opportunities.
That's an interesting angle, right? We often just hear about the ecological importance, but today we're going to be translating that into like dollars and cents.
Exactly. And we've got a really great mix of materials to pull from: official reports, academic papers, news articles.
Wow.
Even a little bit of Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, nice.
For that cosmic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, a diverse range of resources, which should give us, I think, a pretty holistic view.
Yeah, for sure. So this deep dive is brought to you by Profitable Earth Consulting Services.
Okay.
They're the folks who help you make sense of environmental trends and turn them into profit.
All right.
So let's get started. To understand the financial implications, we need to grasp the basics first.
Absolutely. Coral reefs are kind of like underwater cities, teeming with life. They might look like rocks, but they're actually colonies of tiny animals called polyps that build these calcium carbonate skeletons.
Interesting.
And these structures actually support over 25% of all marine life, providing food and shelter for just like a dazzling array of species.
25%. That's a huge chunk of the ocean's biodiversity depending on these reefs.
It is a massive amount. And their importance goes beyond just supporting marine life. They protect our coastlines from erosion and storms. They're a major draw for tourism, and they play a role in regulating the Earth's climate.
So they're providing these valuable ecosystem services with real economic implications, especially for a place like Singapore.
Exactly. But before we kind of dive into Singapore specifically, we need to consider the global context. And this is where our friend Neil deGrasse Tyson comes in. He pointed out that 2023 was a year that broke climate models.
Oh, wow. So climate change is happening even faster than we thought.
It seems so.
What does that mean for the future?
Well, it definitely injects a level of uncertainty into predictions, especially for 2024.
Okay. And for coral reefs, which are highly sensitive to changes in temperature and ocean acidity, this uncertainty is a major factor to consider.
That makes sense. So knowing this global backdrop of accelerated climate change, how does Singapore's position as an economic powerhouse in a delicate coastal environment factor into all of this?
Well, Singapore, as you know, is an island nation.
Right.
It's got limited land, but it holds this strategic location for maritime trade. And its economy heavily relies on shipping, port activities, and industries like petroleum. All of this, of course, impacts the health and sustainability of its coastal and marine environment, including its coral reefs.
So there's this constant tension between economic growth and environmental protection.
There is. But Singapore's been quite proactive in addressing that tension. They've adopted an integrated urban coastal management, or IUCM, approach, which aims to balance, economic growth with environmental protection, which is a key consideration, I think, for financial institutions looking at long-term investments. That does sound promising. I mean, it suggests a pretty forward-thinking approach, which is crucial in mitigating potential risks. But given that Singapore is kind of on the front lines of climate change, impacts like sea level rise, how are their reefs actually faring in this context?
Yeah, that's the critical question, I think, that we need to explore next. And, the global context highlights the urgency and the stakes involved.
Absolutely. Understanding the health and resilience of Singapore's coral reefs is really paramount for any financial institution looking to, invest in the region.
Right. Okay, so, when you picture Singapore, what comes to mind, right? It's all those gleaming skyscrapers, a real global hub bustling with activity.
Yeah, for sure.
Marine life probably isn't the first thing that pops into your head, is it?
Not exactly, no.
But here's the thing. There's this surprise waiting for you just below the surface.
Ooh.
Alongside all that urban energy, Singapore's waters are incredibly vibrant. It's actually pretty amazing.
Huh, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Seriously, we're talking about over 250 different types of hard coral.
Wow.
12 kinds of seagrass and something like 100 different species of fish all squeezed into these reef areas.
That's a lot of diversity.
Right. And get this, these areas barely cover 12 square kilometers.
That's incredible. So it's like this hidden gem, this whole underwater world thriving right beneath this super developed city-state.
Exactly. It's like this amazing contrast that you wouldn't expect.
You've got this intense urban environment up top, and then these pockets of really rich marine life managing to hold on down below.
Yeah, and for someone like you, always digging into how the world works, how different pressures, kind of push and pull on each other.
Always.
This whole situation with Singapore trying to balance its development with the health of its coastal ecosystems, it's a really fascinating story, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah.
You've got that tension between economic growth and environmental protection playing out in a really unique way there.
The goal here is to figure out how Singapore manages to cling to this marine biodiversity, even with all that urbanization.
Right.
And what we can learn from their approach, what's working, what isn't.
Important questions for sure.
And to be totally upfront, this isn't just a straightforward success story. Singapore has had to deal with a pretty major setback, losing over 60% of its coral reefs in recent decades.
Oh, wow.
It's a real wake-up call.
It is. It highlights what's at stake here and why striking that balance is so critical.
Okay, so let's get into this idea of coexistence for a minute.
Okay.
It's almost hard to believe that in such a densely built-up area, you'd find this variety of marine habitats.
Right.
You've got rocky shores, mangroves, mudflats, seagrass beds, and those coral reefs we were just talking about.
It's remarkable considering how much other stuff is going on in those waters too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Alongside all this natural diversity, the sea is being used constantly for shipping, for industry, for everything you can think of.
It's a really crowded marine space.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So how do you even begin to manage that?
Well, that's where things get interesting. See, traditionally, the way coastal areas were managed was pretty fragmented.
Oh.
You'd have different government agencies, each looking after their own little piece of the puzzle.
Like silos.
Exactly. Like ports over here, industry over there, and maybe some conservation efforts happening off to the side.
Not really talking to each other.
Not really, no. And what Singapore realized was that this kind of approach just wasn't going to cut it. Because the pressure on their coastal waters was just increasing all the time.
Too many competing interests.
Exactly. And that's where this strategy they call integrated urban coastal management comes in.
IUCM?
Yep, yeah. IUCM. They adopted this back in 2009. A real shift in thinking.
So what was the thinking behind IUCM? What were they hoping to achieve?
It was about recognizing that they couldn't keep treating different parts of the coastal environment as separate entities.
It's all connected.
Exactly. They had to find a way to manage it all together as one system to balance all those different needs and make sure economic development wasn't happening at the expense of the environment.
So a more holistic view?
Precisely. It was a recognition that long-term economic well-being couldn't come at the cost of a completely degraded environment.
Makes sense. But how do you actually implement something like that? How do you get everyone on board?
Well, they took some concrete steps. First, they set up the Interministerial Committee on Sustainable Development, or IMCSD for short.
What did they do?
This committee was all about setting the national direction, making sure everyone was on the same page when it came to sustainable development.
Okay, so big picture stuff.
Yeah, big picture. Then they created the Sustainable Development Policy Group, or SDPG.
Okay, and what was their role?
They were the ones responsible for actually overseeing the implementation of those policies, making sure the rubber met the road, so to speak.
So you've got the big picture vision, and then you've got the folks making it happen.
Exactly. And when it came to the marine environment specifically, they realized they needed something even more focused. So they set up the Technical Committee on the Coastal and Marine Environment.
TCCME.
That's the one.
Sounds like this TCCME was where the real action was for marine issues.
It was. That's where they brought together everyone who had a stake in the health of Singapore's waters.
So who exactly was involved in this TCCME?
Well, it was co-chaired by the National Parks Board, or NParks.
The conservation folks.
Yep. And the National Environment Agency, NEA.
Which handles environmental regulations.
Exactly. That co-leadership right there signaled that this was going to be a much more joined-up approach.
It wasn't just one agency calling the shots.
No, not at all. They also brought in people from all sorts of other government bodies.
Like who?
The folks dealing with shipping, with food security, with coastal protection, you name it.
Wow, so it was a really broad group.
It was. And they didn't stop there. They also brought in experts from universities and research institutions.
So they had the scientific perspective as well.
Absolutely. That broad involvement was crucial. It meant they were getting a truly coordinated, holistic view of the challenges and the potential solutions.
So that's IUCM, the overall strategy, but what does it actually look like on the ground? What are they doing to protect those marine habitats, especially the coral reefs?
Well, one great example is the 100K Corals Initiative.
I've heard of that. It's pretty ambitious, isn't it?
It is. It's Singapore's biggest coral restoration project to date.
Wow, so what does it actually involve?
It's not just about planting corals. It's about using science and technology to do it in a really smart way.
What do you mean?
Well, first they identify coral species that are more likely to thrive in Singapore's waters.
Ones that are tougher, more resilient.
Exactly. Especially ones that can handle changes in water temperature, which is a big issue with climate change.
Makes sense. So they're not just planting any old coral.
Nope, they're being very strategic about it.
Yeah.
And then they use really effective methods to transplant those corals, making sure they have the best chance of survival.
So it's a very targeted approach.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And it's a direct response to that huge loss of coral reefs we talked about earlier.
Trying to reverse the damage.
Exactly. Trying to actively restore what's been lost.
100,000 corals. That's a massive undertaking. What are some of the challenges they've faced with a project on that scale?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is simply ensuring those transplanted corals actually survive.
Right. They can't just plant them and walk away.
Nope. It takes a lot of ongoing work. They have to monitor their health, protect them from pollution and damage from things like boat anchors and fishing gear.
So it's an ongoing commitment.
It is. And it requires a lot of resources, both money and expertise.
But it sounds like they're dedicated to making it work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a real testament to their commitment to active restoration.
So that's one example of IUCM in action. What's another?
Well, another key initiative is the Sisters Islands Marine Park.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's their first marine park, isn't it?
It is established back in 2014.
And what's the goal of the Sisters Islands Marine Park?
Well, first and foremost, it's about protecting the coral reefs in that area and all the amazing marine life that depends on them.
So it's a safe haven.
Exactly. But it's not just a hands-off protected area.
Oh.
It's also a hub for education, scientific research, and conservation programs.
So they're actively working to understand and protect the marine environment there.
Exactly. They're taking a very proactive approach.
Yeah. So what makes the Sisters Islands Marine Park so special, so important for marine conservation in Singapore?
Well, it's got some really cool features. For one thing, they have a coral nursery off Small Sisters Island.
A coral nursery? What's that?
It's basically like a garden where they grow corals.
Oh, interesting.
And they're not just growing any corals, they're focusing on species that are rare in Singapore waters.
Oh.
And especially those that are vulnerable to things like coral bleaching.
So they're giving them a helping hand.
Exactly. They're trying to ensure those vulnerable species have a better chance of survival.
And what else is special about the park?
Well, they've also built Singapore's first floating boardwalk there.
Cool. I bet that's a great way for visitors to experience the marine environment.
Oh, it is. But it's not just for show. The boardwalk actually serves as a habitat for corals to grow on.
Really?
Yep. The underside of the boardwalk provides a surface for corals to attach to.
So they're basically integrating coral habitat into the infrastructure itself.
Exactly. Pretty clever, right?
It is. And what about this turtle hatchery I've heard about?
Oh yeah, that's another amazing feature. They have a turtle hatchery on Small Sisters Island, where they help boost local sea turtle populations.
Wow, so they're really taking a multifaceted approach to marine conservation there.
They are. Combining protection with active interventions like the coral nursery and the turtle hatchery.
And even using infrastructure like the boardwalk to support conservation efforts.
Exactly. It's all about thinking outside the box and finding creative solutions.
It definitely seems like a big step forward from just trying to manage different parts of the coast separately.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It's a much more integrated way of thinking.
So how does IUCM actually help balance economic growth with environmental protection?
It's all about recognizing that those two things aren't mutually exclusive.
You don't have to choose one or the other.
Exactly. Singapore realized that in the long run, a healthy environment is actually essential for a healthy economy.
Especially for an island nation so reliant on its coastal resources.
Exactly. The old way of doing things where each sector just looked after its own interests often led to environmental concerns being overlooked.
Until it was too late.
Right. And by then the damage was already done.
So IUCM is about being proactive.
Precisely. It's about getting everyone to the table early on and figuring out how to achieve both economic and environmental goals.
You mentioned earlier that Singapore learned from other countries' experiences. Was there anything specific that informed their approach to IUCM?
Yeah, actually there was. A lot of the thinking behind IUCM came from observing what was happening in other parts of the world.
Like where?
Well, for example, PEMCIA, which we mentioned earlier, has been working with countries all over East Asia to promote integrated coastal management.
Okay.
And they've set up these demonstration sites where they're testing out different approaches, seeing what works and what doesn't.
So Singapore was able to learn from those real-world experiences.
Exactly. They saw the benefits of taking an integrated approach, and they also saw the pitfalls of not doing so.
Like what kind of pitfalls?
Well, in some cases where different sectors weren't communicating or coordinating their efforts, you'd end up with conflicting policies.
Working at cross purposes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that could undermine conservation efforts or even lead to environmental damage.
So it's really about breaking down those silos.
It is. And recognizing that everyone has a role to play in protecting the environment.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned learning from past experiences. Did Singapore have any earlier successes with this kind of integrated thinking that might have paved the way for IUCM?
Oh, definitely. One really relevant example is the cleanup of the Singapore River and the Klang Basin.
Oh, yeah. That was a huge undertaking, wasn't it?
It was a massive effort that started back in the late 1970s.
And it was a success.
Oh, yeah, a huge success. Those waterways used to be heavily polluted.
I can imagine.
But the government launched this major initiative to clean them up.
And it involved multiple agencies working together.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a truly integrated effort. They had agencies responsible for sanitation, for water management, for urban planning, all working together.
Wow, so it was a real team effort.
It was. And the results were incredible. They transformed those polluted waterways into clean, biologically diverse environments.
That's amazing. What's even more impressive is that they didn't just clean up the water.
Right. They actually went a step further and turned those cleaned up waterways into freshwater reservoirs.
So they actually increased Singapore's water security.
Exactly. It was a real win-win situation. They improved the environment and they created a valuable resource for the city.
So it was a clear demonstration of how integrated management could deliver both environmental and economic benefits.
It was. And it really showed what's possible when different sectors work together towards a common goal.
It's a great example. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the financial side of things.
All right.
Our listeners are always keen to understand the economic implications of environmental initiatives.
Makes sense.
So how does IUCM and all these efforts to protect Singapore's marine environment connect with the interests of financial institutions?
That's a great question. And it's one that's becoming increasingly important as the world grapples with climate change and the need for sustainable development.
So how does it all tie together?
Well, for starters, Singapore has this ambition to become a city in nature.
I've heard that phrase before. What does it actually mean?
It's a vision for a city that's integrated with nature, where green spaces and natural habitats are woven into the urban fabric.
So it's about more than just parks and gardens.
Exactly. It's about making nature an integral part of the city itself.
And how does that vision connect with the marine environment?
Well, part of that city in nature vision includes a really ambitious goal to restore and enhance 80 hectares of marine and coastal habitats by 2030.
Wow, that's a significant amount of area.
It is. And it represents a real opportunity for financial institutions.
Oh, so?
Well, for one thing, these habitat restoration projects require significant investment.
Of course.
And that's where financial institutions come in.
Yeah.
They can provide the funding needed to make these projects a reality.
So we're talking about green financing for marine conservation.
Exactly. And it's not just about funding individual projects. It's also about aligning investment portfolios with broader sustainability goals.
You're talking about ESG, environmental, social, and governance.
Exactly. Investors are increasingly looking for opportunities to put their money into projects that are not only financially sound, but also environmentally and socially responsible.
And marine conservation fits right into that.
Absolutely. Projects like restoring coral reefs or protecting mangrove forests, they tick all the boxes.
They're good for the environment, they benefit local communities, and they can potentially generate financial return.
Exactly. It's a win-win-win situation.
So Singapore's commitment to marine conservation is creating opportunities for investors who are looking to do good while also doing well.
Precisely. And the government is actively working to make Singapore a hub for green finance.
What are they doing specifically?
Well, for one thing, they're building up expertise in environmental risk management within the financial sector.
So they're helping financial institutions understand and assess the risks associated with climate change and environmental degradation.
Exactly. They're also providing grants and incentives to encourage the growth of green and sustainability-linked loans and bonds.
So they're making it easier and more attractive for financial institutions to invest in sustainable projects.
Exactly. And they're also looking at the potential of carbon markets.
How does that fit into the picture?
Well, there's growing interest in developing a voluntary carbon credit market.
Okay.
And nature-based solutions like restoring mangroves or seagrass meadows, they have the potential to generate carbon credits.
Because they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Exactly. And those carbon credits can then be sold to companies or individuals looking to offset their own emissions.
So it creates a financial incentive for investing in marine conservation.
Exactly. And Singapore is really well positioned to be a leader in this space.
It sounds like there are some real opportunities for financial institutions to get involved in Singapore's marine conservation efforts.
There are. And not just to support those efforts, but to potentially profit from them as well.
But what about the risks? Are there any downsides for financial institutions to consider?
Well, the risks are maybe less obvious, but they're still there. If Singapore were to backtrack on its commitment to IUCM and those conservation efforts were to falter, that could have negative consequences down the line.
In what way?
Well, think about it. The continued decline of the marine environment could impact all sorts of economic activities.
Like tourism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People aren't going to want to visit beaches that are polluted or coral reefs that are bleached.
Right.
And it could also impact industries that rely on a healthy marine ecosystem.
Like fisheries.
Exactly.
Yep.
If the fish stocks decline, that's going to hurt the fishing industry.
So in a way, investing in marine conservation is a way of mitigating those risks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about protecting the natural assets that underpin the economy.
Makes sense. So to sum it all up, it sounds like Singapore, despite being incredibly urbanized, is making a real effort to protect and even enhance its marine biodiversity.
That's a great summary. And they're doing it through this integrated management approach, IUCM.
With initiatives like the 100K Corals Project and the Sisters Islands Marine Park.
Exactly. They're showing the world that it's possible to balance economic development with environmental stewardship.
And it's a really valuable lesson for other countries and cities facing similar challenges.
It is. It highlights the complexities, but also the opportunities.
And the importance of thinking long term.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that a healthy environment is essential for a healthy economy and a healthy society.
Well said.
So how do these conservation initiatives, like SIMP, translate into financial opportunities?
Yeah.
What specific areas can FIs engage with?
Well, there's several avenues. For banks, there's the potential to finance sustainable development projects, support green technologies, invest in companies specializing in reef restoration. This ties in with, the growing demand for ESG-focused investments.
Right, and ESG investing is definitely gaining a lot of traction. But beyond simply investing in companies with good ESG scores, how can FIs actively contribute to reef conservation efforts in Singapore?
Well, that's where a more nuanced understanding of ESG criteria comes in, right? Investors can look for companies that are actively contributing to marine conservation, perhaps those involved in coral propagation, or developing innovative solutions for reef restoration.
So it's about going beyond, the surface level and really digging into the specifics of a company's environmental impact.
Exactly. Asset managers, for instance, can play a really crucial role in identifying and supporting those kinds of companies. They can incorporate marine conservation metrics into their investment frameworks, ensuring that their portfolios actually align with the goal of reef protection.
Makes sense. And what about insurers? What role do they play in this?
Yeah, well, insurers can develop innovative insurance products that are specifically designed to mitigate the risks associated with climate change impacts on coastal infrastructure and ecosystems.
Okay.
This could include products that cover damage from rising sea levels or ocean acidification.
That makes sense. It's about providing a safety net for investments in coastal areas and promoting sustainable practices.
Yeah.
But we can't ignore the threats that still loom large over Singapore's reefs.
Of course not. Coastal development, land reclamation, and pollution from shipping and industries, right? Those all remain significant challenges.
Yeah, those are kind of the inevitable byproducts of economic development, right? Is there a way to kind of reconcile those competing interests?
Well, Singapore is acutely aware of this dilemma, and they've implemented really stringent regulations on pollution from ships and offshore industries. They've also invested heavily in water treatment and waste management to minimize land-based pollution.
So it sounds like a multi-pronged approach, targeting both prevention and mitigation.
Yeah.
But then there's the overarching issue of climate change. How are they addressing that on a local level?
Well, they're actively involved in research and conservation efforts, like coral transplantation and the creation of artificial reefs, which we discussed earlier. And these efforts are guided by their Marine Conservation Action Plan, or MTAP.
Okay. What exactly is the MCAP, and how does it contribute to, like a favorable environment for investment in Singapore's blue economy?
So the MCAP is a comprehensive roadmap for marine conservation in Singapore. It's a living document, so it's constantly updated based on the latest scientific knowledge. And this demonstrates a long-term commitment to sustainability, a factor that can instill confidence in FIs who are looking to invest in marine-related projects.
So by creating this stable and predictable regulatory environment, they're essentially de-risking investments in their blue economy.
Yeah, precisely. It sends a clear signal that they're serious about sustainability and that they're taking concrete steps to protect their marine environment.
But all of this effort, all of this investment would be meaningless without understanding the underlying value, right? Like, what's the actual economic value of these reefs? How do we measure that?
Yeah, that's a critical question, and one that I think often gets overlooked. We tend to focus on the ecological value, but the economic value is equally important, especially from a financial institution's perspective.
Totally agree. Break it down for me. How do we quantify the economic benefits of something as, it's like seemingly intangible as a coral reef? Okay, so let's talk numbers. How do we actually quantify those economic benefits of a coral reef?
Well, coral reefs are economic powerhouses in a way, and we can measure their value in, several different ways.
Okay.
So take tourism, for example.
Right.
Singapore's cruise industry alone contributed like $706 million to their economy in 2016, a 36% increase from 2010.
That's huge.
It is. And that's just one piece of the tourism pie, right? Diving, snorkeling, all the other reef-related activities generate a lot of revenue.
So healthy reefs equal a thriving tourism industry. What about other sectors?
Well, coral reefs are also vital for fisheries, right? They provide habitat and breeding grounds for countless species of fish, many of which are commercially important. In Singapore, the fishing industry contributes significantly to both the economy and food security.
So the decline of coral reefs could have a ripple effect on various industries and even impact, like food security, for Singapore.
Exactly. And then there's the often overlooked benefit of coastal protection. Coral reefs act as these natural breakwaters, absorbing wave energy and reducing erosion.
Right.
This protection translates into significant savings in terms of coastal infrastructure. There was this global study that estimated that coral reefs provide an average of US $4 billion per year in coastal protection benefits.
Wow.
So imagine the cost of replacing that natural infrastructure if reefs disappear.
That is a staggering figure. It really does highlight the tangible economic value that these ecosystems, provide.
It does. And when you factor in all of those benefits, the potential losses from reef degradation become even more clear. For financial institutions, this is where risk assessment becomes so important.
Absolutely. So how can FIs incorporate those ecological and economic considerations into their risk assessment models?
It requires a shift in thinking, right? Traditional risk assessment often focuses only on financial metrics, but to accurately assess the risk associated with investments in, coastal areas or industries that rely on marine ecosystems, we need to start including environmental factors as well.
So it's about expanding the scope of risk assessment to include those often overlooked environmental factors.
Yeah.
What are some practical steps that FIs can take to do that?
Well, banks, for instance, can incorporate environmental due diligence into their lending practices. They can assess the potential impact of projects on coral reefs before granting loans. Asset managers can develop investment strategies that are specifically targeting companies that are actively engaged in reef conservation or those that are operating in a way that minimizes their impact on marine ecosystems.
So it sounds like a proactive approach is key here. Rather than simply reacting to environmental damage, it's about anticipating and mitigating potential risks right from the start.
Exactly. And for insurers, there's a huge opportunity to develop innovative insurance products that incentivize those sustainable practices and protect against the financial risks associated with climate change impacts on coral reefs.
So rather than just, covering losses after something happens, insurance can play a role in actually preventing those losses from happening in the first place.
Exactly. It's about aligning those financial interests with environmental sustainability. And that's where the concept of the blue economy comes in.
Right. We touched upon the blue economy a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on, what exactly that entails and its significance here?
Sure. So the blue economy basically encompasses all economic activities that are related to the ocean. from fishing and tourism to renewable energy and biotechnology. A sustainable blue economy recognizes the value of healthy marine ecosystems like those coral reefs. It seeks to kind of harness the economic potential of the ocean while ensuring its long-term health and resilience.
It sounds like a really holistic approach that considers, both economic prosperity and environmental well-being.
It is, and Singapore, with its proactive approach to marine conservation and its focus on sustainable development, is really well positioned to be a leader in the blue economy. This presents a ton of opportunities for those forward-thinking financial institutions.
Absolutely. So what would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners, those who are looking at all this from a financial institution's perspective? What's the call to action?
I'd say the key takeaway is that ignoring the value of coral reefs is no longer an option, right?
Yeah.
Their decline poses those significant economic risks, while their protection and restoration offer a lot of untapped opportunities. And FIs have this critical role to play in the transition towards a sustainable blue economy. They can do so by incorporating environmental considerations into their risk assessments, developing those innovative financial products, and supporting the businesses and initiatives that champion reef conservation.
It's about recognizing that environmental sustainability and economic prosperity aren't mutually exclusive, but rather interconnected and interdependent.
Right, exactly. And for those who are seeking expert guidance in kind of navigating this complex landscape, organizations like our sponsor, Profitable Earth Consulting Services, can provide valuable insights and support.
For sure. They're the go-to experts for, all things sustainable finance.
So for those of you listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts on all this.
Yeah. What are your takeaways?
Given Singapore's approach, what role do you think financial institutions globally can and should play in supporting similar efforts?
What are the opportunities and the challenges?
And how can we all work together to ensure that our oceans and coastal areas are protected for generations to come?
It's a big question, but it's one that we all need to be thinking about. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I've gained a much deeper understanding of the, intricate relationship between coral reefs, economic prosperity, and the role of financial institutions.
It's been a pleasure talking about it with you. Hopefully it sparked some ideas and inspired, a new perspective on the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead.
Definitely has. As we wrap up this deep dive, a huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us. We hope you found this exploration valuable. Remember, knowledge is power, but action is what creates change. So let's all do our part in safeguarding these precious ecosystems for generations to come.
I agree.
This is The Deep Dive, signing off.
Beneath the waves where the ocean sings lies a world of color where life begins. Coral reefs, the skyscrapers of the sea, home to 25% of marine life, can't you see? Oh, the colors beneath the waves, a treasure we must save. Oh, the colors beneath the waves, for the future be brave. They're the rainforests of the deep, a treasure we must fight to keep. Less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they give us so much more. Oh, the colors beneath the waves, a treasure we must save. Oh, the colors beneath the waves, for the future be brave. They're the rainforests of the deep, a treasure we must fight to keep. Less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they give us so much more. Oh, the colors beneath the waves, a treasure we must save. Oh, the colors beneath the waves, for the future be brave. of the ocean's design. But over